Welcome back to the Empowered Athlete Podcast. It's your host, Natty Boss. And in today's episode, we are going to have a special guest, Miss Lindsey Doyle. I'm really excited to have this conversation today because it's all going to be about weight cutting, which is something that both of us specialize in with the athletes that we work with. And as it stands right now, as when we record this, it's International Women's Day. So we found what a perfect day to have this conversation. Because this is something that can really support and empower women in learning how to really take care of themselves in pursuit of optimal performance. And to give you a little bit of background about Miss Lindsey, she's based out of Ireland, which is so cool. She's a 37-year-old mom of two who lives in Dublin with her fiance, kiddos, and two doggies. She started kickboxing at 14, and by 16 was fighting all over the world in the Irish kickboxing team and arena. And she also competed internationally in boxing, MMA, and jiu-jitsu. And in the meantime, she was studying law in university and pursuing a career in that area until her mid-20s, and decided law wasn't for her and decided to follow her passion, which was sport and strength and conditioning. She completed a lot of self-experimentation to make weight over the years based on research, which was primarily based in men. So we'll definitely be talking about that. And since then, she has had a huge passion about female combat athletes, both making weight and strength training to reach their full potential. She's a third-degree black belt in kickboxing, a purple belt in jiu-jitsu under Darragh O'Connail. Did I say that right?
Yeah, O'Connail.
And a level 2 strength and conditioning coach under the late, great Charles Poliquin. She studied functional sports nutrition with Institute of Health Sciences in Dublin, and then completed her master's in exercise and nutrition science with the University of Chester. She runs 3 businesses, her Female Fight Nutritionist online practice, which her link to her Instagram will definitely be in the show notes. And she's a brick and mortar gym with 2 business partners in Dublin called the Lab Performance and Nutrition, and a jiu-jitsu strength and conditioning subscription business called Impruv Grappling, which all of that stuff will be linked in the show notes. So she has so much experience and wisdom under her belt, backed by degrees and certifications. So welcome to the show, Lindsey. I'm so excited to have this conversation today and to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. And what a great day to be here on International Women's Day.
Yes, absolutely. So obviously we shared a little bit about your background and what made that switch, but I'd love for you to start off with a little bit about your experiences with that aspect of like that self-experimentation with weight cutting, the strategies that you tried. And I'd love to know, knowing what you know now, are some of the strategies that you tried something that you would continue to encourage women to try, or maybe there's a different approach knowing what you know now?
Absolutely. The short answer to that is no. I wouldn't recommend doing what I did. But it's funny you should say that, because bringing me back to myself in my late teens, early 20s, having to make weight all the time. That's what, when I'm doing my Female Fight Nutritionist content, that's who I'm talking to. I'm talking to myself back then and trying to tell myself what I would have loved to hear and to know. But basically what happened with me was I started kickboxing for a school project. And I really enjoyed it. And I fought straight away because I learn under pressure. So I knew that of myself. So I was like, okay, I better get in the ring and start learning. It was the same with jiu-jitsu. Actually, I had only started jiu-jitsu about a month and the competition was coming up. And I remember Darragh sitting me aside and being like, I hear you want to compete. I'm just not too sure. And he's like, you're used to winning stuff. I just don't want to lose you if you lose. I was like, no, it's the absolute opposite. I throw myself into the fire so I can learn. And I actually got put asleep at that competition. So funny, by a bow and arrow, because I just didn't know that I was in any form of trouble until I was asleep.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. The beautiful bow and arrow choke. I have great defense for bow and arrows now.
See, that's what I learned.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly how I learned. So I started competing and fighting in kickboxing, and I just entered at what I weighed because I was 16 and that's what you did. But what happened was then I qualified for the Irish team, and then I won a couple of things and I wound up getting seeded, and then I was growing, but my seeding was in the weight class that I was in. So I kept kind of trying to cut to stay in that weight class, because then when you go to the Europeans or the Worlds, you get a good draw if you're seeded well. So I was probably beyond the weight class that I should have been, but I kept on cutting, and it just kind of got harder and harder. And at the time, I had started with a strength and conditioning coach, and thankfully he had a functional medicine background as well. And so he was able to kind of help me a small bit. But it all just went, it just got harder every time to make weight, because the bounce back afterwards was always bigger because the deprivation was longer. So the binge afterwards was worse. And it all kind of came to a head when I was I think I was about 24, 25, and I went to a boxing competition. It was like a very prestigious invite only thing. And it was a big deal to the county board here in Ireland that I had been invited to compete in. And I went, but you had to weigh in every day. And every day you won, you would fight the next day. And I got to the final. So I had 5 weigh-ins in 6 days.
Wow.
And I was really struggling because I was fighting. We were in the UK. I had no access to a sauna or a bath. So I was doing a lot of running to try and sweat and then trying to fight. And actually, when I got home from the UK, I lost the final. Nothing to do with my weigh-ins. The girl was just excellent. But when I came home, I was quite sick and I kind of frightened myself. So that was when I decided, okay, I need to say no to any fights for a few months and try to fix myself and get my body in a state where if I just reduce my calories slightly for like 4 to 6 weeks, it will react well, rather than doing the whole binge restrict. So, I mean, cutting weight wise, I've had some lows. One low I particularly remember was, again, having no access to a sauna or a bath, being in Norway with the Irish kickboxing team. Again, at another invitational thing that would be super embarrassing if you missed weight when you were invited over as the champion at that weight. And the hostel that we were staying in, the bathroom had a heated floor. So I was lying on the floor in the bathroom with duvets wrapped around me and the shower on, trying to create a steam room situation for myself.
Wow.
Again, it's just like, it's so bad, so bad. So I want to help people to do things like I've done so many runs with lots of clothes on or black sacks on, plastic clothing. So I just want to help people to be able to sweat easily without doing all those silly things and suffering unnecessarily, because I think as women, we're great at suffering. Like we get our period every month. I have this bee in my bonnet about people thinking period pains are normal just because they're common. They're not normal. They're common, but they're not normal. And as women, I think we've been led to believe you should suffer every month. And like, that's why I think my job is to save female athletes from themselves, because they will absolutely starve themselves and they will absolutely run 20 miles before a jiu-jitsu competition to make weight, because we're just good at sucking it up and getting on with it. And it's just not right. And we don't need to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. You spoke to so many things that are just so prevalent that I work with as well. And it's that binge restrict, how that just is so detrimental to long-term weight loss. And you also spoke to something which is really an important conversation, which is the developmental phase. Because when you were starting this, like you were 16, still like growing with your hormones and everything like that. And that is actually something that a lot of Olympians experience, high-level athletes, where they start at such young ages and then their body starts to change, but they're like committed to this certain weight class. And nobody's really taught them or encouraged them to shift along with their body. It's more like a body shaming around like, well, your body is wrong, you should be in this weight class, and it really sets up for disordered eating, disordered hormones, disrupting the period, which has long-term detriments, which we'll definitely talk about. But those are definitely some of the things that are crazy. What was the most weight that you've ever cut in that like short-term setting?
The most I think I done in one day was 5 kilos the morning of a weigh-in.
Wow.
Yeah. And as a percentage of what I weighed, that would have been for a 57 kilo MMA fight. So that's almost 10% of what I weighed, so people like to talk in kilograms, but I like to talk in percentages of bodies, because, 5 kilos maybe for a 120 kilo man might not be a big thing to do in a day, but certainly for a 55 kilo woman, that's huge. But yeah, what you said there about the young girls is concerning, because I did read a study when I was doing my thesis about the earlier you start a martial art, the more likely you are to do severe weight cutting. So like, you know, you have the women that walk into jiu-jitsu in their late 20s, early 30s, they are less likely to cut weight for any competition than someone that starts as a child or a teenager. And of course, as you know, on the other side of their fertility journey and menopause and stuff, that's really detrimental.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting. I started jiu-jitsu when I was 18, and I actually never had to cut for Taekwondo. There wasn't really weight classes, to my knowledge, but when I joined jiu-jitsu, I was like starting cuts immediately. And now that I'm a black belt, I kind of think it was like, it is so silly to cut weight at a white belt. Like,
oh, absolutely. I had this
like
conversation
you
the other
just
day.
need to go out there and learn and just like do your thing. And like, it's literally not that big of a deal for you to have to cut weight. Like if you're going to be more leaning on like athlete being as a lifestyle and like being a sponsored athlete, being professional athlete, that's really where it matters. But you shouldn't just be focusing your journey on like getting small and fitting in this weight class versus just like focus on your weight where you are and focus on just performing well and learning and growing. And with that said, like there is also that other piece of wanting to do your best. And some people are just overweight, or they have a bigger fat to muscle ratio, which can affect their performance. But that's why it's even more important to do it in a healthy way and not do these drastic weight cuts and fall victim to this restriction and binging. Would you like to speak a little bit to that, maybe within your own experience, as well as with maybe some of the athletes that you've worked with and how you've supported them and like overcoming maybe some of the stories that come up and the fears, because that's the biggest thing. I think it's just eating more food and realizing that's actually going to support your metabolism, support your body in losing the weight, versus like going on those extreme binges.
Yeah. And it's so hard to convince an athlete of that if they're already in that cycle. It's a lot of my work. People think I'm sitting with people and I'm talking about protein and carbohydrates and macros and micros. A lot of my work is unpacking years of disordered eating. So what I would consider subclinical eating disorder. I very rarely meet a female athlete that doesn't have some form of disordered eating if she's been making weight for a time. And trying to unpack that with people can be quite complex. Because it kind of goes against what they've been doing and what they've known. And again, they relate this suffering to success. So it's like it kind of switches them on to having to restrict their food for their competition. But the reality is, and this is what I try to say to them, is if you want to get better at your martial art, you need to train well in a session. And to train well in a session, you need to fuel that session. So if you're going to go 8 weeks, say just this perfect stupid example, like say low calorie but low carbs to jiu-jitsu, you're not going to get any better. You're not going to feel any fitter. The fluctuations in your cycle are going to become more extreme. So you're going to have really struggle mentally. And then you're going to enter this competition and you're not going to perform,
Yes.
So I always say, and especially with white belts, I had a conversation the other day because someone asked me the question as, what would you advise a white belt that's just started jiu-jitsu that wants to cut some weight for their first competition, but their body is training because they've never trained before, so the body's changes with these, say, females that come in that have never done a sport. And my answer was, don't cut weight, enter at the weight you're at, because at white belt, there's no advantages to be had. It's crazy. Yeah. But also the fed fighter is going to win at the end of the day. I mean, the unfed fighter might survive their first match, but they're certainly not going to perform well second, third. And you need to remember, as the competition goes on, as you progress, your matches are getting harder.
Yes. Yeah. When you get in that finals match, it's the two best people in the bracket.
Yes. Yes.
It's not going to be an easy fight by any means. And I think that's what you're speaking to is really important. It's like kind of this longer term vision and like looking to the long term versus like that short term.
Yes.
Some people are just so focused on like making weight.
Mm-hmm.
And like they're not even focused on like, not to say like worry about the matches or how many matches that you have. You don't want to like have anxiety and worry about that, but you do need to consider the reality that you may need 3-4 matches. And if you're not planning that far in advance, then it's going to like continue this cycle of like inadequacy, because you're just going to feel like, man, I couldn't actually just perform. I get the adrenaline dump, or my body starts to have these muscle contractions, because they're not fueling their body right. or they just don't have the energy dump, and I always tell people, I'm like, if you're signing up for a competition, you're most likely wanting to win. And for those who don't think they want to win, that's just more of the inner work that needs to happen, of like actually fear of actually doing really, really well. But if you're signing up for a competition, I don't want to hear that like, oh, I just want to, try. You can just try at the gym.
Yes.
But those who sign up for a competition, they want to win. So you have to actually do that for yourself too. And like you said, the fed fighter is going to win every
100%.
single time. And there's something that you had said too that I think is really important. I do believe as a lifelong martial artist that there is some level of suffering that is required for your sport, but it's not a suffering that impacts your well-being. It's not suffering where you are a detriment to your well-being and your health, but there's like a suffering of like, for instance, like a self-loving discipline, which I often speak to. Like when you say yes to a competition, you're going to have to say no to some other things, right? Absolutely. Like you might need to limit your alcohol intake, because it's not being restrictive, but you have this goal in mind. And if you want to set yourself up for success in reaching that goal, there's some things that you're going to have to sacrifice. But we don't want to enter suffering in the state of like, I'm completely depleted emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually, and going into this fight thinking that I'm going to win. I mean, that's just delirium in my opinion.
Yeah. And especially if you're a hobbyist, I mean, it's different. Like I have different levels of what I'll allow with like a professional MMA athlete that is been paid, only gets paid when they fight, versus like a jiu-jitsu hobbyist. And in those situations, when people go that deep in the suffering, and like even their personal relationships are suffering, their career probably suffers, definitely their long-term health, they can't enjoy their martial art. Like this is your hobby that you're supposed to love. And like competitions are always going to be nerve-wracking. And I actually quite enjoy that, putting myself in that situation where my body is in fight or flight. And I find it, like after all the years of doing it, I find it quite funny in that like I'll still be nervous and I'll still be thinking, what the hell am I doing here? I could have just been at home. Why do I put myself in these positions? But I enjoy being able to look from outside myself and laugh at my body doing that and realizing it really doesn't matter. In the grand scheme of life, nothing matters, but it is a problem. And what I say a lot to people is if you want to be able to jump into competitions, especially as women, because there's less opportunities. So say if you're looking for if you're getting to your higher belts and you're looking at the profession, there's less opportunities for women. There's less kind of weight discrepancies. So if you do want to make a go at this, you need to be able to take fights on short notice. So that means you can't be bouncing back hugely afterwards and compromising your health to get on weight, particularly for female MMA fighters, but I believe so for the jiu-jitsu athletes coming in now when they're getting off with super fights and stuff, and even boxers. So you need to stay within a reasonable level of your weight class if you're taking it seriously.
I love that you said that. That is such a brilliant point of like constant, like almost being ready. And what I like to think of and like what's recommended as far as like a walking weight and your fighting weight, I always recommend to athletes it being within a 5-pound distance. 5 pounds is, absolutely doable. It's not going to wreak havoc on your metabolism. And that means that you have to think way longer term. Like you need to put yourself on an 8-month weight loss plan if weight loss is what you're doing, or there's muscle building as well. But whatever it is, you need to think way long term so that you can get to a space where you're fluctuating a maximum 5 pounds. So that your weight cut is mainly just a matter of cleaning up your diet, maybe, a little bit of water, and that's about it.
And like, if your metabolism is firing correctly and your body trusts you, tighten up your calories for 3 to 4 weeks would absolutely get it. I would say the same, but I would say within 5%, which would be about 5 pounds for most women anyway. Yeah. But because I think like a water load can get us 2.5-3% off. And then we just need a tight diet for 2 or 3 weeks. It's no problem,
Yeah.
Then afterwards as well, I used to have this thing that I called Last Supper-itis. When I knew I was going into like a 10-week fight camp restriction, I would try to eat everything I thought I was going to miss in the next 10 weeks, which is so counterintuitive to anything that makes sense. And then you start into your camp, you're inflamed, you're bloated, you're miserable then as you're kind of coming off all of those sugar highs the following week. And then inevitably what happens, and I see this a lot, and I've done this myself, I'm guilty of it, is eating really, really under eating, say Monday to Friday, like really low cal, being okay with it because I was busy between work and training, and then binging at the weekend. So then if I looked at my calories over the week, I wasn't in a deficit at all. I was in a surplus because I might have had a stupidly low level that I wouldn't recommend anybody, say about 1,200, 1,100 calories Monday to Thursday. But then I was having like 3,500, 4,000 on Saturday and Sunday. So you're adding extra days to your week. And then that's when people come to me and they're like, I've tried everything. I can't lose weight. I don't understand. My body's not reacting. And I like unpack it with them.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it's something that we do and we don't kind of calculate it. And as females with a menstrual cycle, we actually need to, well, what I do is I get my athletes to do their calories over the month. So in the month, this is how many calories I would like you to eat. Tell me your heavy days, tell me your lower days, tell me the days of your cycle that you're hungrier, and let's assign more calories there and let's take them from the other days that you're not going to need them so much. And that works well because they know they're in a deficit over the entire month.
I love that. That's a really good approach. Beautiful.
Yeah.
So let's shift a little bit into what are some weight cutting myths and mistakes that you find athletes fall into most often?
Yeah. A big one, I guess, is the athletes try to water load and they kind of do it a bit backwards, or they go way too high on the fluid and they take out their fluid way too soon. So always as a principle, if you're going to be dehydrated, do it for as little time as possible. So if you know, again, I wouldn't recommend jiu-jitsu athletes dehydrating at all because they have to step on the mats, but just work back from the time of weigh-in and work your dehydration from then. So you'll hear people like, oh, should I cut out fluids 2 days beforehand? I'm like, absolutely do not cut out fluids 2 days beforehand. This is not good for you. And then they would have this for females as well. They would take advice from men in the gym and they would be like, oh, well, I'd hit 8 liters of water. So that's probably about, I think 2.5 gallons maybe for you guys, but a lot of water. And I'm like, yeah, but he is 100-kilo man and like he shouldn't be drinking 8 liters of water anyway, but just don't tell the 50-kilo girl in your gym to do the same water load as you. Like we need to work off percentages of our body weight. And then the kind of drinking a load of water at the start of the week and then no water kind of close to weigh-in, whereas actually the way it works best is if you gradually increase your water throughout the week. And then just have one lower fluid day. It would still be like 15 mils per kilo of body weight. So it'd still be a liter and a half for a standard woman. And then you should weigh in light. So that's a big one. And then kind of restricting calories is huge as well. And yeah, fighters, females, like I say, we're very good at starving ourselves, you know. Really restricting calories and not training, not getting any training adaptations, not getting any better. And then, you know, you're at risk with that binge restrict cycle of getting into Red syndrome or the female athlete triad, which is what it would have been in previous years. And then that's why then they start to pick up niggly injuries. If there's ringworm going in the gym, they're definitely going to get it because their immune system is compromised. You know, all these flus and viruses, fatigue, not sleeping very well, and then the menstrual dysfunction, which knocks everything off as well.
100%. Yeah. And I think that the low calorie thing, like the body, like food is what gives us the calories and gives us the energy that we need. And I think also alongside low calorie is often like low carb.
Yes.
And the thing about the carbs is it really fuels the muscles. It fuels those glycogen stores. And that's really what we need, especially in like jujitsu, where we're utilizing pathways, metabolic pathways that need carbohydrate to actually perform. Mm-hmm. We're just setting ourselves up for not having the energy to actually be able to execute in the moment, as well as a decreased recovery in between matches, like we were talking about, like kind of like, okay, that fourth match, you're going to start feeling that dump. That third match, you're going to start feeling that dump. And then also decreased recovery post competition, where that might actually, like, you're in your own experience. And I've experienced this as well years ago, where you get sick.
Yes. Yeah.
You get like just this sick because your body is like finally off this fight or flight high, and it just dumps. And now you get sick and now you're out of training for X amount of days or weeks, and, you know, just upset that you're sick and can't train. It's like, well, you should not be upset. You should see this as information, see this as feedback. Absolutely. That way and the approach that you took might not have been the best for the long term, right? So like maybe we can shift our perspective and shift our approach so that that doesn't have to happen, because the reality is that doesn't have to happen. And like you said, I think things like that have actually been normalized, where it's like, oh, you get sick post fights, like, oh, that's just like the way it happens because of the XYZ. It's like, no, actually that's not supposed to happen. It's just something that we've accepted as normal, because like you said, we were also accepting of just like whatever suffering comes with the sport, or perceived suffering has to come in order to make it seem like you're being an athlete.
Exactly. Yeah. And I remember one stark moment in my jiu-jitsu club. I was talking to a new white belt, and she was saying she had stopped cutting weight. She had done a few competitions, and she said to me, oh, I thought you just had to cut weight. I thought, because it's all everybody talks about when there's a competition coming up. And she said, I genuinely thought to enter a competition, I had to cut weight. And it's just so alarming. Like, you absolutely don't. You just enter at what you weigh, There'd be difference. Like, there's always, say for me, for example, there's always the weight of the gi. I always sit between like that. I'm either 69 kilos or I'm 74 kilos. And I'm like, just need to get rid of the weight of the gi. But that's perfectly easy. That's a good water load, and it's no problem. But it's the people, and I do like weight classes have their benefits. And so weight cutting is never going to go away. So that's why I always just try to make it a safer way to do it, and try to talk people away from the extremes and into the healthy. Just manipulating your body mass for 5 days before a competition is fine, versus these extreme people losing 10+% of their body weight the week of a competition and expecting to perform, but expecting to perform over the course of their martial arts career and their long-term health. It's just not good. So if we can get people that are going to cut a little bit of weight, because I understand if you fall between two weight classes, like if you're at that 1 to 2 kilos, I can see why you might want to push, because you probably know you could tighten up your diet yourself anyway. But it's when people are trying to drop 2 or 3 weight classes, or perfect example, like you said, maybe they've started lifting, or just because of coming to jiu-jitsu or a martial art, they've started to get some muscle growth that they hadn't had because they haven't been athletic before. Just go into the weight class above. Yeah. It's fine. And you're going to perform much better. You're going to enjoy the competition much better. And unless you're at like that black belt level and you're going to come up against a professional athlete, I think the differences are minor. Obviously, I would be a big proponent to tailoring your nutrition to performance, and that's an edge. That will give you an edge, because most hobbyist athletes aren't doing that. 100%. So if you're looking for an edge, have it be that, rather than enter in a lower weight category and be like a corpse going onto the mat to begin with.
100%. Yes, I agree. I love this. So I definitely want to have the conversation and expand it a little bit more into the whole idea of menstruation, because that's something that a lot of women experience. For a long time before getting pregnant, this was actually pretty on the dot of like every time I had the competition, I had my period. So that's a big concern that people come to me constantly with. It's like, I just got my period. I'm fighting this week, the menstrual bloat, things like that. So how do you recommend navigating weight cutting with menstruation when you can't necessarily time or sign up for a competition? In a perfect world, you could probably pick the competitions when you're not going to get your period. Yeah. But, sometimes it's just not the case. And, tournaments that you want to enter are just going to be around that time, and it might just happen. So how would you recommend navigating that in a healthy way?
Yeah, I always say like the woman in the bracket that's ovulating the day of the competition is going to win, because she's got all that testosterone, she's flying, everything is lined up for her to just wreck everybody else, Yeah. That's where you want to be hormonally, is ovulation. But yeah, what I say to people is, and the biggest point that I try to get athletes is, knowing your own cycle is the biggest power you can have, because athletes come to me and they'll say, I'm due my period the weekend of this competition. And I'll say, okay, and normally what happens with your weight when you're due your period? And they're like, I'm not sure. I know that I feel crap, and I'm like, yeah, but will you go up a kilo? Will you go down a kilo? Because it happens differently for different people. Yeah. And often a lot of the menstrual cycle related things that difficulties people have with competitions are actually psychological. So I feel like once an athlete knows, so say, for example, a week before the competition, if you're in that high hormone, so that days 21 to 28-ish, your brain plays tricks on you. You'd be like, I'm so sluggish, I'm slow, my reaction times are terrible, I'm wrecked, I've only done 2 rounds, I could normally do 5. But just knowing, oh, it's my high hormone week. Of course, I feel like this.
Yeah.
Takes that panic out of the, because sometimes you go to jiu-jitsu and you feel like, have I actually ever been in a jiu-jitsu class before? What is wrong with me? And it's been actually, because I had a baby in May and I'm still feeding her, and so my cycle is just regulating now, and it's been a great refresher course in me, because pre-pregnancy I would have known where I was in my month, and it would be the first thing I'd check if I found myself having a mood or feeling some way about something. I'd be like, oh, because it's day 23, of course. And, and that's fine. But for the last few months, not knowing where I was in my cycle, if I was ovulating, if I was getting a period, it really taught me to be like, oh, these things are happening and I don't know. So the power of knowing your cycle is amazing. But there are things you can do. So if I know there's a competition, and this is again why I say to athletes to always give time. Don't be, saying to me, Lindsey, I'm fighting in 3 hours and I need to lose 3 kilos. It's just not helpful, So just be like, I've signed up for the Dublin Open. It's in April, and talk, it's now February, but I know I'm going to get my period the week of, potentially the day of. Then we can plan for it. If we're looking at a calorie deficit and we're looking that you normally bump up a kilo on that week or those 2 or 3 days before you start your bleed, we're going to account for that in our deficit, and we might have our deficit be slightly more aggressive the week before, so that we can account for maybe a little fluctuation. And then there are some supplements, if you're a person that does bloating or water retention, extra electrolytes in your water has been shown in some studies to help negate that, because we know that our sex hormones also regulate our body water. So sometimes if the system goes off, like the sodium in your water goes off, the body will retain water to try and balance it. So sometimes when we're having large hormone fluctuations, that's why we get water retention. So adding electrolytes can help your body to regulate that. And the same way, adding extra magnesium. If you're an athlete, you should be supplementing magnesium anyway, but to add extra magnesium in that week, that might help. And then there's just being ready, doing a good water load. Generally it'll sweat out. If you bloat, it'll sweat out. Yeah, it is water retention. But again, the power is in knowing that, so you don't get a surprise, wake up the day of the comp and you're a kilo heavier than yesterday, and it's a big surprise and a big panic.
Yes, I think that unknowing factor is what causes that panic and anxiety. Like Absolutely. You said, like when you have that awareness and that knowing, it's a little bit more, I think it provides a little bit more peace of mind and like empowerment, because you understand what it is and you're not just like confused. And I think that's where that panic and anxiety will then start to come from. So I think that's really important and really, really great tips to support people in navigating that. And one of the things I wanted to, because we're kind of on that topic of menstruation, and I think it's important to really discuss the female athlete triad. Actually, I had this in high school when I had my eating disorder. I was diagnosed with this. I had osteopenia. I lost my period, and they were concerned with just like the bone density and everything like that. And I didn't really care at the time because I was in high school, and I was like, well, I don't ever think about getting pregnant. It's not something that I'm concerned with at the moment. And I think what I found in the years after seeing other people too, I think there's this weird element of like sometimes pride in not getting your period, because it's like, it's not a problem I have to deal with.
Absolutely.
But it's like, you are actually sorely mistaken. It is one of the biggest problems. It is not like something to be proud of, no. Which is something I did for a long time. Was like, oh, you're struggling with this bloating on your weight period and you're this, and like this is nothing that I have to deal with. So this is just great. But it was definitely not great long term.
No, and not even short term. Like your monthly cycle needs to be treated like your report card from your body as to how you're doing. So you should be having a normal like 25 to 33 day cycle. It should be relatively pain-free. It should be a nice amount of red blood, and if anything goes off of that, that's your body's warning shot. I'm not happy this month. What did you do this month that's made me unhappy? And it's a thing that people think menstruation is fertility based. So you don't need a period if you're not looking to have a baby. It's fine. That's not the case. It increases your stroke risk, your heart attack risk, your bone density problems. Then just that, like we said, that picking up like stress fractures, compromise immunity, development, depending on what age you're at developmentally.
Yes.
So it's a whole host of things besides just not getting pregnant. So there's an education piece around that. And that's why I like to talk to athletes about that, is you need to know that your period is important, not just for making babies. It's important. If your menstrual cycle is normal, you're going to perform way better. Your hormones are going to work with you. There's a power in this, and harnessing the power of your cycle is where you're going to get all the benefit. With the opposite side of kind of your cycle disappearing and thinking, great, I don't have to deal with that. You're living in a limbo land of not knowing where you are or what your hormones are doing. And you're gonna eventually, it will catch up with you. But as you said, at the time you didn't care. And why should you care? And this is the problem. And that's why I always say we have to save athletes from themselves.
Yeah.
Because all they can think of is the next competition and the next medal.
Yeah.
And unfortunately that you can't think like that. And if you want to have a long career, if you want to be competing, but also your health at the other side. And I know like 16-year-old me didn't care about 65-year-old me. Now I'm like, I want to live into my very, very old age, but I also want to be alive in my very old age. I don't want to just be alive and immobile and on tablets from head to toe. I want to be alive and old, So, and that's where the lifting comes in as well, obviously, because for the bone density loss and stuff, the resistance training is huge. But no, the menstrual cycle, education around it. And I feel like as well, coaches, and the problem is a lot of coaches are, they're volunteers. They're working on a volunteer basis, or they're running a private business. There's no regulating body as such, but there should be education around female menstrual cycle for any coach that's working with girls or women.
100%. And when it comes to the female athlete triad, one of the biggest things that puts women at risk to be potentially diagnosed with this is what we had talked about already, like numerous times on this episode, which is this falling into this belief system of like under eating and overtraining. That's like the number one thing that really starts to put you in the potential category of getting that, because you're really messing up your hormones. And so if you're somebody who's like stuck in these cycles and belief systems of like under eating and scared to eat more food and scared to take rest days because you just have to keep training and training. I mean, I really want to invite you to kind of pause for a moment and really assess, I think why am I doing this? I think that's a question you need to ask yourself. Like, why am I so committed to this? And I think looking at more of the longer term, realizing that this is something that is severely detrimental to your health in the short term and the long term and your performance. But that's the biggest thing that especially dietitians like notice is the under eating, the overtraining is absolutely going to increase your risk of getting this female athlete triad.
Absolutely. And it's kind of almost like it's a badge of toughness to some people, how much can they train in a day? Like I'm doing 3 a day, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And again, the way to get to the athlete is by threatening their performance. So if you can get it into their head that you're not going to perform well, you're not going to get to them by talking about themselves as an elderly lady, maybe some of them, but all they can see is the next competition. So you need to kind of chat to them about the performance. But the problem with like the female athlete triad, it's dangerous, but it's also, it's hard to come out of, because it comes as a result of oftentimes years of these small little disorders adding up. And you can't just unpack that, you can't just turn it around and say, eat more calories and you'll be better. It's not easy for an athlete to do that. But likewise, it's also hard to diagnose, because generally, if you sat someone down and said, okay, you've got amenorrhea, your period has gone missing, then someone has to put together maybe the stress fracture they had in their heel 18 months ago, or the fatigue. And there are all these little things that can be explained by training very hard, or traveling for competitions, or, by dieting. They can all be explained away. Yeah. So it's important to educate ourselves and coaches, but mainly the power is in our own hands about our own menstrual cycle, our own health, our own, longevity in our career. about the signs and signals of these things, what might be coming up. But 100%, if you've missed a period, you need to address that, look at it. Why? What happened last month? What can we do to fix this?
Yeah. And one thing I just want to state to those who are, high level competitors, I want you to know that I don't want you to feel like, well, I know there's people that are doing 3-a-days. Like, why can't I do a 3-day? And the thing is, you can absolutely do a 3-a-day, but what you can't neglect is that means you're going to increase your caloric needs.
Yes.
And I really don't think people realize how much fuel they may actually need to sustain that level of training. Like,
yes.
It's in the thousands and thousands of calories if they're doing 3-a-days of intense training. And that is tough. It's way tougher to eat a lot of calories than it is to cut calories, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
I was in a muscle building phase for a long time, and it was hard to get all that calorie in.
Yeah, especially from good wholesome food, because a lot of the good, like your vegetables and stuff, they really don't have very many calories in them at all. But also, if you're training, if a 3-a-day looks like 6 hours training for you, it's a second job to eat and get your calories in.
Yeah.
But also, there's the saying that train smart, not hard.
Yes.
And that is a great saying, but people need to really think about that. Well, what does that mean? That means listening to your body. And there is a difference between, listening to your body when you're just not feeling like it, but your discipline should kick in and you should go. And actually, if your body is literally so depleted, you need to rest. But another thing is, I say to athletes, you have to take your sleep as seriously as you take your training. So you schedule in your sleep like you're going to a jiu-jitsu class, because you're lying in your bed on Instagram dozing off. You're not going to have a restful recovery. And if you want to be able to train hard alongside obviously fueling your sessions and fueling your recovery, there's other sides to your life that need to be supported as well to make that happen.
100%. Yes. And that's why I'm so passionate about the wheel of performance, because the sleep, the self-care, those are such critical aspects that aren't sexy, right? It's like, it's not sexy. It's sexy to just train.
Yes.
But the reality is you need to see these other pieces in order to really become a wholesome athlete that you desire. And it's not sexy, but if you decide to do this, this is what it entails. This is part of your job description.
Yeah.
Like you said, like eating is part of taking it serious, just like your training. And so I'm curious if we haven't hit on any, we have hit on some of the things, but I don't know if there's anything else that you want to add to some of the dangers of last minute weight cuts.
Yeah, absolutely. They are many. They're so we have lost some MMA fighters that have died over the years, cutting weight from a state of dehydration. So, death is obviously the worst danger. If someone dehydrates themselves to a state of organ shutdown. But even just brain injury. So if you think about, if you're talking about jiu-jitsu where you might be choked, or you're talking about a striking art where you might be hit in the head. And if you're competing even slightly dehydrated, your brain is exposed to injury because it's not got the fluid around it that it would, and even your own reaction times. So real dangers to problems there. And then also there's there would be gut issues. So if you just go really, really dehydrate yourself and not eating any food, you will entirely empty your gut. And they will be in distress afterwards. So they then try to eat something, or maybe, between their 2 jiu-jitsu matches, they might try and shove some food in, and they're not going to be able to digest it. So best case scenario, they might have to run to the toilet and be stuck there for a while. But worst case scenario, you really kind of injure your gut and need to spend some time on the other side of the competition healing your gut, because that's where then you start to pick up those little infections we talked about, or even just your mentality would change. So yeah, there's many, and then there's the injuries and stuff like that, and just the psychological element of it. And oftentimes what I find is there's a lot of shame attached to missing weight for some reason, or going up a weight class. It's like as if if they have to go up a weight to class, it's like they've been defeated by something, rather than realizing this, my body has changed. This is what I weigh now. This is the better weight class. So if someone is really doing something extreme to make weight, and then they miss weight, or they do make weight and they really don't perform, or they have a really bad loss, the psychological fallout after that is huge.
Oh yeah.
And then generally alongside that, there's the binge, which we talked about, and the binge restrict cycle is so dangerous. And we know already that athletes are more prone to eating disorders than the general public, but then weight-based athletes are even more at risk, and then female weight-based athletes are the most at risk. So
100%.
If you're talking about, this was supposed to be your hobby to keep you fit, and now suddenly you've got this eating disorder that you need to unpack, and along with the eating disorder comes all of the health implications, physical and mental.
Yeah. So it's so important to have this conversation, because you may enter into this like innocent, but like what can happen when you're not aware and being intentional, is now stuff that you're going to have to come to one of us to later down the line to unpack it all. And it's like, we're trying to be in the prevention side of things to prevent you from having to need us by increasing the awareness of these things. So you had mentioned, you had a post that I really enjoyed. I wanted you to expand on it, because I really think it's important, especially like you were talking about like that, the shame associated with having to go up a weight class. And I want you to kind of expand on when to know when to abandon your weight cut.
Yes. Yeah. So if you were talking about like the acute weight loss phase, like the sweating it out phase or the dehydration phase, again, I'm conscious that maybe we'd be talking about a lot of jiu-jitsu athletes with you, but I would work with like MMA, like day before weigh-ins as well as day of and multi-day weigh-ins. So for a same day,
we also have wrestlers. We have wrestlers also, and wrestlers often with like national competitions will have 2-day weigh-ins. So
nice.
Strategies. So yeah, for sure.
So so the jiu-jitsu people they shouldn't be dehydrating to make weight basically, but the people that have like the 36 hour recovery can manipulate their body weight a little bit. So if we're talking about that stage when they should abandon it, I would say if you were doing your sweat, and basically if you stopped sweating, if you've stopped and managed to sweat, or if you find yourself, if you're sitting in a sauna or lying in a bath or doing like a passive sweat, and your heart rate is raising for no reason, you haven't exerted yourself any more or any less, that's your body's in distress. It's trying to figure something out. So you need to cool yourself down, abandon what you're doing. I would say drink some water. The athlete might want to just weigh in or whatever, but just stop the heat situation that's going on, the passive sweating. The same with any dizziness or nausea or vomiting. It's probably gone a bit too far, but at that stage, I would say don't even fight. Don't need whatever competition you're planning doing. It's not happening. Get yourself rehydrated, refueled, and take to the bed for a day or two, because you've really upset your body.
Yeah.
Unless it was for a UFC belt, it really wasn't worth it. And the problem is sometimes these things are glorified. Like I seen last year, now it came down quick enough, but it was one of the UK fighters, and they had a video on his Instagram, and it was him in one of those portable saunas that they zip up on themselves and just their head coming out, and he was vomiting out of that.
Oh my God.
Like this weight cut was really hard, but we got the job done in the end or something. But he was so slated online by anybody, just been like, do not glorify that is ill, and your team should have stopped that weight cut long before you were vomiting out of a portable sauna.
Oh my God, that's insane.
Yeah, absolutely. And then if you're talking about the chronic weight loss phase, where we're talking about like kind of trying to lose a bit of fat leading up to a competition. So this would be the 8-10 weeks before the competition. If your calories are kind of low for you, I'd say like figure out your BMR, add in so that's your basal metabolic rate, add in your exercise variant. If you're touching to close to your actual BMR, you're not eating enough. So if you're not losing any weight, I would say just stop, or if you're feeling miserable, if you find yourself emotional, obviously if you're due a period and it doesn't come, absolutely increase your calories. But if you're feeling emotional, like if you feel yourself snapping at your family, like, or you're not able to focus and work, you're having a bit of brain fog, and it's out of character for you normally. So if you're normally just a grumpy person, that's fine. But I would say stop whatever calorie restriction you're on, increase your calories a bit, and just go up a weight class.
Yeah. It's really nerve-wracking for a lot of athletes. There's been quite a few athletes who come to me with the intention of competing, and when we divulge and break down kind of their habits and what they've been doing over a long period of time, my recommendation comes back of like, I really think that for this competition that you have coming up, weight cutting shouldn't be the answer. I really think that you need to fight at your weight, because if you're thinking long term, we actually need to just establish healthy, balanced hormones again. And
Yes.
if I support you in cutting weight for this tournament, it's only going to perpetuate. You're not actually going to learn. I really recommend increasing your calories and us really focusing on hormone balancing and compete at this higher weight class for this tournament. And then think longer term, maybe 6 months down the road, you can work to have a steady weight loss to fight at that weight. But where you are right now, based off the symptoms you're having, based off all of this, I mean, you have to think, what's more important to me, the number on the scale or how I feel in my body?
Yeah.
If you have chronic fatigue, if you have mood swings, if you just are having all of these negative things, it's like, you have to be able to feel good at baseline in order to be able to perform under stress.
Absolutely. And they lose sight on that. And you touched on it a bit earlier. I've had fighters, and generally kind of with MMA fighters, or when they have the gap between the making weight and the competition, is they literally think they've won the fight because they made weight, and they have given no thought to the actual fight. And so that's why my thing is on weight and winning. Like, let's not forget there's 50%, like the winning should be 98%. The making weight should be the 2%.
Yeah.
But they lose sight of that. But like, I mean, it's hard. I've said no to a good few fighters, and one particularly high profile. And Natty, it was 7 days before she was due to fight on a very, very large promotion, and she was 10 kilos over her weight. And her coach reached out to me and said, can you get her on weight? And I said, yes, I could get her on weight, but we might kill her. She certainly won't perform. And I'm not touching this. This is just not, she should not be fighting. And she did fight a week later. She missed weight, but not by too much. But then she was knocked out.
Yeah.
And she was probably partially dehydrated in the cage. But it's just, you have to, the sad thing is they will find someone that will do extreme things with them.
100%. Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
So I used to be quite shy of Instagram. I was always like, I don't want to, be on Instagram all the time. But like 2023 was the year I decided, and I think it was having my daughter kind of spurred me on. I was like, this is the year that I'm going to get out there and talk about this stuff and let women know it doesn't have to be like this, and you shouldn't be compromising your health to make weight for competitions.
Yes, 100%. Yeah, it's really crazy. And I've turned down people.
Yeah.
I had to do, full disclosure and like vulnerable moment of like inner work on myself, because the helper in me wants to help, right? As many people as possible. But when I had to come back to my core values, integrity is one of my values. And it just never sat well when somebody would reach out and say like, I have to lose 10 kilos in a week for this competition. Like, I'll sign up and I want to work with you. And I'm just like, I'm sorry. I love that you want to work with me, but I actually can't do that because it goes against my ethics. I need to think about your long-term health, and I hope that you are able to make weight, but it's just something I can't be a part of because I can't contribute to potentially damaging your health and, the repercussions of what we might have to do to get you there, and that was like a lot of work I had to do on myself to say no to people and like work through all of that. Like, I want to help that person. I know they're going to go end up doing something else, but at the end of the day, also from a liability standpoint, I need to protect myself as well, because I don't want to be on the receiving end, of doing things at all costs and not caring about your health. It goes against everything that I'm literally here to do. So I can't do that. And that can be challenging as an expert to just turn people away, but know that it's still going to happen.
Yeah. For me, it would have been like, it would be almost like I was saying that I couldn't do it. It's like, but that's not the case. Like, like I always say to people, anyone can get anyone on weight. Anyone can dehydrate someone through sweating. It's just whether you do it well and will perform. And there's like, I would have like green, amber and red zones of percentages of people coming to me at how far they are away from their weight class, and we'll decide from there, because if you're going to have to go for an aggressive calorie deficit, for a woman for a man it has repercussions too, but for a woman the repercussions run deeper. And unfortunately, one of my pet peeves is even with red S syndrome, or the female athlete triad. So REDS is an expansion of that, so it encompasses other situations, so the other things that we talked about. It's so understudied because females are so understudied in the literature. That really bothers me. So we're fighting through this unknown area, and it's kind of all anecdotal evidence. There's no solid evidence. There's no, like, recently the International Olympic Committee have done a kind of a return to play protocol for Reds, but it's all still very vague and it's not really implemented across the board. Coaches probably haven't even heard of it. I only heard of it because I was doing my master's thesis and I was researching, but generally females are so understudied. And even so, the side effects of the calorie restriction, people might refer to studies, you know, about fighters and calorie restriction and making weight, but like, I've done it for my master's thesis, so I know those studies don't include women. They just did not include. So they might say we had a cohort of 200 jiu-jitsu athletes that blah, blah, blah. And there might have been a single woman in that 200. Yeah. So it's just not a useful study for us. And when they do include women, they control for the day of their cycle. So they generally tend to put them in on day 9, which is kind of a neutral enough hormonal system. And I get it, because you have to try and control as much as you can in scientific data. Yeah. But it just means that we're relying on anecdotal evidence and people like you and I that have been in the trenches, ourselves, but B, working with women over the years to kind of see these trends and see what's worked and what hasn't. And so with the athlete triad, and you're kind of trying to say to an athlete that's trying to peak, you know, when you want to have babies, when you're, you know, when you want to go upstairs when you're 70 years old because you forgot something upstairs and you want to be able to walk up the stairs, and they're like, what are you talking about? ADCC is next week and I've got to lose, you know. But I know that of myself because I had to do a lot of work. So when I stopped competing in kickboxing, it was a very pivotal time in my life, because I kind of was losing the gra. In Ireland we say gra. I was losing the love for competing in kickboxing. I had achieved what I was going to achieve. I couldn't really get many fights in Ireland because it's very small and I was very experienced. Yeah. And I just wasn't getting what I needed from it. So I stopped competing. At the time, I was figuring out I was in the wrong career, and then I was also in the wrong relationship. So at once, I moved home with my parents. I was like mid-20s. I was training for a new career. I was working a new job. I was single for my first time as an adult. And I had no competition to distract me from all that. I had nothing booked in. Yeah. And I found it hard to live in the middle, in that very unsexy moderation place. Because I had spent the previous 10 years either in camp mode restriction or out of camp mode binging, or just indulging my every whim, basically. So I went to therapy for a long time and had to figure out, how do I exist in this place that it just really isn't, there's no deadline. So how do I change my mindset from eating to make weight to eating for health and longevity?
Wow. So beautiful. Thank you for sharing that part of your story, because many people I know need to hear that for sure. Yeah. It's been such an amazing conversation, and so much I hope people have taken away from this, and hopefully shift their mindset a little bit and perspective of how they want to move forward in approaching weight cuts and competition, and really prioritizing their health and well-being. And hopefully that's something that they take away from this, because that's the purpose of having this episode. And I would love for you to share a little bit about the ways in which people can connect with you and how to potentially work with you, if that's something they're interested in.
Absolutely. So at the minute, the best place to get me is on Instagram, on my @Female Fight Nutritionist Instagram. I'm chatting in my DMs all the time. I love talking about this stuff. And like you said, it's so funny that we're both the same star sign, an almost identical martial arts history, and we've landed here. But I am that helper as well, and I can't help myself if someone contacts me and they're struggling with something. Actually, something I really want to say that I forgot when we were talking about when to abandon weight cuts earlier. A big thing I see as well is people doing these things alone. So if you are going to go to a sauna or go to a bath, please don't go alone. Bring somebody with you, because you need, and preferably someone that's not also cutting weight or competing, so you can have a rational brain there that can call it for you if they need to. But also, God forbid, if anything happened, if you passed out or something, that there was someone there to help you. Not that I'm advocating anybody passing out cutting weight, but these things do arise. So please don't ever cut weight on your own. But so people can reach out to me on Instagram mainly. I'm having a website developed at the minute, but I'm so slow at getting back to the developer. Every time he has some iteration, I'm just like, I just have a mental block for it. I'm like, but it's not the right color. And he's like, Lindsay, it's about how it works. We'll do the colors afterwards. I'm like, okay. But and I'm trying to, at the minute, I ran a seminar last week. I'm going to run it again. It's kind of like a 3-day over Zoom thing. Group seminar going through these kind of the stages of your cycle and how they might affect making weight, and just some basic nutrition development, just for, again, talking to my 18, 20-year-old self. What did I need to know? But for people that maybe can't afford like the one-on-one private care that we provide, or just don't need it, just need a little bit of guidance and a little bit of, you know, if they've just started jiu-jitsu and they just want to make sure they're fueling their training. And that's it, yeah. So on @Female Fight Nutritionist on Instagram.
Okay. And for that like upcoming masterclass series that you're doing, do you have like a specific link that I can add to or how can people like potentially register for that?
Yeah, I haven't. I just ran it last week and I'm going to run it again in a couple of weeks. So maybe I generally would send an email out to my mailing list to give them first refusal. So maybe we'll put up a link to my email list and people can join there.
Yeah, you can join our email list, or you can just stay in the loop on Instagram, and I'm sure you'd announce it as that comes up. So we'll definitely put that up as well. And then lastly, I always like to end for those when they do jiu-jitsu. What is your favorite takedown and or submission at the moment?
Yeah, single leg is my takedown go-to. Since the beginning, I think, just from coming from a striking art, I'm comfortable standing. So the running joke with my other half, Austin, is a brown belt in jiu-jitsu, and he calls my guard the stand up and get a single leg takedown guard, because he's like, that's
I love it.
Just disengage, stand up and get a takedown. So every variety of single leg. And then for submission wise, it's an arm bar, the old reliable kind of step around arm bar would be my go. Yeah.
Love it. So
I'd love to say I'm dexterous enough for the new open guard stuff, but I'm absolutely not. My strengths are in like power, close quarter, half guard type stuff, you know.
Nice. Amazing. So good. It was so amazing to connect with you, sharing your knowledge, your wisdom, your experience. And as always, those who are listening, anything that you've taken away, any golden nuggets or insights that you've had, we would love for you to share it on social. You could tag the Female Fight Nutritionist and Body by Boss LLC. We will reshare your content and just, you know, support you and celebrate you in showing up for yourself and listening to this, expanding your awareness and educating yourself. That means a lot. And the messages I constantly receive of how helpful these episodes are means so much to me. So please keep sending those messages. And as always, if you have any requests moving forward, you can always shoot me a message as well, and we'll make it happen and have it on the podcast. Thank you so much, Lindsey, for spending this hour with us. And we will see you guys in the next episode. Thank you.
Thanks, Natty.